Welcome to Scoolinary, the online cooking school that transforms people and connects cultures. You will learn with the best chefs in the industry, and you will discover the broadest online catalog of topics related to gastronomy. We publish new courses every week. In our podcast, we have coffee with a chef every week. Each of them will tell us about their experience and their vision for the culinary world to help you better understand this exciting industry. Come on, join us for coffee. Today we are pleased to have Irini Tzortzoglou join us for coffee. A native of the island of Crete, Irini took a chance on entering MasterChef UK, which she won in 2019 with her exceptional talent for creating dishes with Greek influences. Since then, she has published a book of recipes from her Greek kitchen and has dedicated herself to projects ranging from hosting culinary retreats and pop-ups to representing women in the food industry as an ambassador. Hi, Irini. Welcome and thanks very much for accepting our invitation to coffee.
Thank you for inviting me. I always say yes to coffee.
Great. Before we begin, a question we ask all our guests is, of course, are you a coffee drinker? Sounds like you are. How do you take your coffee?
Well, I was always a lover of Greek coffee until I went to Andalusia, where I was introduced to cortado, and that has become my absolute favorite. But when I'm in the summer in Greece, I always go for a freddo cappuccino, which is delicious, but it's got lots of ice. And you need that, in the heat of the summer when it's 35, 39 degrees.
Wonderful. That sounds really delicious, actually. Please tell us in your own words who you are, where you're from, so that our listeners can also get to know you a little better, please.
Yes, of course. So my name is Irini Tzortzoglou. It means the son of George, my surname. I'm of an interesting blended background because my mother's family were located in Crete since the 15th century, where they settled um, by decree of an emperor of Byzantium. And then my father's family came over from Asia Minor in 1922 as refugees. Very different cultures. Obviously, Greekness was the common thread in both families, but very different influences. And I took them on board since I was a little girl. So I was born on the island of Crete. I grew up in Athens, where I went to school and learned languages. And in 1980, I moved to the UK, where I have been living since. But I never stopped coming back to Greece. And my husband, John, and I have a home in Crete. And it was always very important to me to have roots, and it was having those strong roots that helped me to become very, very happy and content living in the UK, embracing world travel and just learning from other cultures and picking up influences. And this is reflected a little bit in the way I cook for us at home. But since I did MasterChef in 2019 as a board retired banking executive, I have gone back more to my home cuisine, which is, of course, Greek cuisine.
You're currently on your native island of Crete, where you're about to welcome guests to one of your culinary retreats. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Um, yes, I love my retreats. I discovered um, only very recently through a program I did called Your Sacred Gifts that teaching is one of my natural gifts. I always held teachers in very high regard, but I never knew that I would actually enjoy it. And holding retreats gives you that opportunity to share and instill, pass on to others your own passion about what you love and where you come from. So the retreats here are always a week long, and they comprise activities ranging from cooking demos, which I give, but in this instance, because we are holding it in a small boutique hotel with a restaurant, I will also work with a couple of ladies in the kitchen, each one of them showing different things. Um, to a visit to a organic biodynamic farm, a visit to a winery accompanied by lunch. And of course, I'll be giving them olive oil tastings and honey tastings because I'm very, very passionate about those two products. And of course, we have some of the best olive oil and honey on Crete. So it's just a natural thing for me.
One of the lessons during your retreat includes making homemade filo dough, which is a paper thin dough that's layered to make both sweet and savory Greek dishes. It's something that we typically tend to buy in the grocery store or the supermarket. And I wanted to know what marks the difference between homemade and store bought filo dough.
Um, Firstly, I think that there's nothing wrong with the store-bought filo. And in fact, for desserts, for pastry, I would argue that it's the best. It is very, very fine and it allows you to use many layers of filo, which make the dessert extra crispy. Whether it is mixed with nuts in the case of baklava, or with cream in the case of galactobureko, or anything else you want to use it for. But here in my retreat, we'll be concentrating on the traditional filo, which is always made by hand, of course, and with extra virgin olive oil. And the secret recipe to the Cretan filo is that you use a tiny bit of the local eau de vie called raki or tsikoudia. This alcohol creates little bubbles in the filo as you fry your little pies or whatever you use it to make, and makes them particularly crispy. So the texture, the contrast in the texture of the crispy filo and the soft cooked sautéed greens that the filo encases, or the beautiful honeyed cream, for example, that contrast is particularly delightful in the mouth. So I will be showing my guests how to make the traditional Cretan filo. Still very thin, but a little bit differently made. And as I said, with lots of little pockets, lots of little bubbles on the surface.
That sounds heavenly. It really does. When you applied to be a contestant on MasterChef UK, how much experience did you have with flavors and the techniques for cooking?
Hardly any, actually. I always knew what I liked. And in fact, only recently it dawned on me that I was always a discerning eater, even when I was a child. And that led my family um, brandishing me as a bad eater, difficult child. But I have remembered that I never really liked dishes drenched in olive oil, and that I would often get bored with the same texture in a plate full of food, always looking for a combination of flavors and textures. So clearly, there was something always there in me, but technically, I didn't know how to put flavors together, and I certainly didn't think I could cook without following a recipe until I actually did MasterChef. As for techniques, I was party to many processes that my grandmothers and my mother engaged in order to preserve things dry, ferment, all these things. I learned how they were done, but I didn't go to culinary school. So, in terms of modern techniques and certainly molecular cuisine and the more fancy things that we do these days, I started being very interested in when I decided to apply for MasterChef. And I thought, well, I will be required to show a little bit more expertise. And I started learning then. But even courses like some on Scoolinary, I still continue this journey of learning. I don't believe one ever learns everything, but I am excited by techniques and by processes. So I try to follow all the courses on Scoolinary, and I am particularly excited by the ones that involve new approaches, new techniques. So I continue to learn all the time, but I didn't know until very recently, 3, 4 years ago.
Incredible. What's been your most inventive dish to date?
That's an interesting question. when when your roots, like mine, lie firmly in a civilization that goes back thousands of years, I don't believe that you seriously think that you invent anything, because people use the expression reinventing the wheel, and I see time and again, we all take things that have been done, spoken about, written about, and find our own way or different ways to do them, to make them, to showcase them, to plate them. So, if we think, for example, the craze about fermentation these days, mm, or foraging, they go back thousands of years. Um, Now, we may tweak things, but I can't really claim, in all seriousness, I don't think I have invented anything at all. Although I enjoyed playing with the ingredients and the idea that I could create a dessert, a pudding, as we say in English, to celebrate the Queen's Jubilee, Platinum Jubilee last year. So I had a lot of fun doing that.
What was in the pudding, if you can tell us?
Yes, well, I started thinking about it not from the perspective of the eater or the diner, but of what was close to the Queen's heart. And the Commonwealth was always very important to Her Majesty. So I looked to the Commonwealth to give me inspiration and ingredients. The base of the pudding was made, uh, it was a ginger and chocolate um, cake, biscuit, a biscuit type of cake. The base was firm, something between a cake and a biscuit. Um, and on top of that, there was a jelly like substance. In English, they used to call it blancmange, and it goes back years ago. It was a very popular type of pudding in the English cuisine, and that was made with milk produced by British farmers, because the Queen believed in supporting agriculture and farming and things. And in that were crushed ginger biscuits that gave it a little bit of texture. And on top, the pudding, I suppose, was brought together, and the creaminess and the richness was mitigated by making a very fresh fruit salad of things like mango, pineapple, things from countries of the Commonwealth that that became very zesty by the addition of lime zest and lime juice. So the whole thing was very, very refreshing, and you could eat it as dessert after a meal. So it wasn't a cake. That's why I refer to it as a pudding.
Your book, Under the Olive Tree Recipes from My Greek Kitchen, seems to be an autobiography through food. What are the recipes from the book that conjure up the most vivid memories for you?
Um, I think all the memories, actually. The publisher asked me, I'm really blessed. It wasn't even my idea. I cannot take credit for that. The publishers asked me to put a lot of me in the book and a lot of my childhood and the influences in my cuisine and what I love to eat. So, they say that memory of smell is one of the last to go. So I guess the recipes that are my beloved ones and the ones that stand out are the ones that transport me to my childhood, to my grandmother's kitchen, my mother's kitchen, and fill me up with heartwarming memories. So, for example, my grandmother used to make these pork sausages, do all the process by herself, from chopping the meat finely to curing it in vinegar, red wine vinegar and spices, filling the actual intestines, hanging them in front of the fireplace to smoke. You can just imagine during cold winter days having these beautiful vinegary smoky aromas in the kitchen. So I have a recipe trying to recreate those sausages of my grandmother without a fireplace and without it taking, weeks as it did her to serve the final product. But one such recipe is in my book, and I have quite a few like that one.
Well, with that comment that you just made, you just touched upon the value of ingredients. And so you remarked that ingredients are king and that you respect traditional methods for using them, yet you've developed your own approach. Can you explain what that approach is?
Well, whether we like it or not, things in 2022 are not really as they were in my childhood years, in a small village of Crete. So, for example, we don't have open fires or wood burning ovens, and the weather where I live in northern England doesn't even permit for barbecuing much of the time, which, we all know these things add a lot of umami to food. So, in writing the book or giving demos at festivals or over the internet, my concern is how can foodies maximize the flavor of their ingredients, which, let's face it, a lot of the time do not have the natural sugars that vegetables, fruit, and pulses that grow, in a climate like Greece. So, by experimenting and playing, as I call it, I try to recreate the same eating experience, as much as possible, of course, as we would in Greece, but without always having the ingredients that make Greek food as delicious as it is. Um, so I also believe that, not working physically as hard as we did when I was a child, it means that we cannot and should not eat the amounts people ate in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up, like olive oil, for example. So it's one thing to use loads because you produce it, as my ancestors did, and you don't think of the cost element. Um, and of course it gives lots of flavor, but it is a fat, and these days we don't work so hard. So I have adjusted the way I use these ingredients to reflect our our lifestyle, um, our tastes. They are different, um, our financial, capability, and so on. I think it's important that we examine, and food evolves like language evolves. I don't think for a second that I should now be cooking like my mother or her mother before her did. Mm, so in that sense, my approach has evolved to reflect the now. My change has changed. My taste has changed in the last in my adulthood. So I'm aware of the planet's needs. I'm aware of what I can afford. I'm aware of where I live. All these things inform my approach to cooking.
Since you won MasterChef, how has your cooking evolved?
Well, you know what they say about practice makes perfect. Um, my cooking, of course, has become better. I didn't even used to cook a lot before I applied and before I did MasterChef because of circumstances. While I was in banking, I was working long hours. My husband was away often on business, so I wasn't cooking very much. But skill tests like we had during the competition, like the scratch challenge, where we were called to create a fabulous dish out of leftovers, fish bones, a few scraps of vegetables and so on, um, really helped me become a better cook, and more importantly, perhaps, the confidence that competing and ultimately winning the competition has really helped me become more experimental, braver, um, inquisitive, and so I would like to think my cooking will continue to evolve as I do more of it.
In addition to MasterChef, published cookbook author and teacher, you're also an olive oil sommelier. Uh, what's next for you?
I think MasterChef opened the floodgates of my brain, and I really want to consume knowledge as much as possible. So there are some things that I absolutely want to learn better or more about, and honey is one such thing. So at the end of this month, in fact, I will travel to Bologna in Italy, where is the only place I have found that you can study to become a honey sommelier. So I'm going to be doing that at the end of May. And it means a lot to me. It means a lot to me to share knowledge, to help consumers, the people I come to contact with, to make better choices, perhaps knowing what they are buying. Um, but because honey, olive oil, and wine are the three most adulterated products in the world, it makes it more urgent almost for all of us to know before we make our choices as to what we buy and ingest. So I'm very, very excited to be learning about honey next.
And that brings me to the next question about climate change. Climate change has a significant impact on your current profession. And do you feel that you have a role or a responsibility to sustainability?
Yes, I absolutely. I think that. I mean, I think firstly we all do, if for the good of the future of our children, of the planet. But if we are to say that people like me who've been lucky enough to be given a platform or the term influencer, I think we have a stronger duty to do more, to cook responsibly, to inform, um, to show by example what we can do to do things better than we are now. To me, preservation, regeneration, and nose to tail are very natural principles to follow because they're in my DNA. That's what I grew up with. But I try to talk about them as much as possible when I come in contact with others and in my own cooking and food preparation. But I also think it's only through education that I believe we can change the course that we are on. And in that sense, social media is great for spreading the word. Look at how much one chef like René Redzepi has managed to do in our attitude towards foraging through his restaurant in Noma. I think if every chef on social media can incorporate some basic principles in their work, we can all collectively make a massive difference. And I also find this exciting in the work that I do.
You said that one of the lessons you want to share with the world is you're never old enough to change your life, which is a really nice, kind of more positive way to saying you're never too old for something. Uh, you're never old enough to change your life, which is a personal sentiment for you as well, since you left a 30-year career in banking to dedicate yourself to what you do now. How would you encourage people to take a chance on themselves very much like you did?
Well, I would go a step back and actually, because I learned valuable lessons. And one of the most valuable lessons I learned was before changing your life, in a way, there is a lot of value in accepting your life the way it is. You see, I spent many years not enjoying banking. I didn't feel it represented me, I didn't feel it suited me. But the last 3 or 4 years, I have come to realize that banking was a necessary part of my path because it later enabled me uh, to enjoy the things that followed it. So I suffered with low self-esteem for many years because for my father, nothing I did was ever good enough, and in a way, that feeling, that thing I carried, crippled me in the career choices I made when I was younger. But still, with what I know now, as I said, I don't regret the career path that I followed all the time in banking. Um, so my starting point is that for any change to come about, we first need to self-love and accept. And I would say to people feeling frustrated or dissatisfied with where they are in life, embrace you now, because wherever you are at this very moment, it is the necessary point in your life's path. And explore from that point of being happy or content, explore what is around you. Don't be scared to attempt, but also be ready to do the work. Um, keep your eyes open for when the opportunity comes along. In my case, it was John's suggestion that I applied to do MasterChef, and I actually heard it. It's very important to have our eyes and ears open, and then be ready to throw yourself with all you've got when that opportunity ignites a little flame in you. I think there is always very much to gain, even if that is not always a MasterChef trophy.
Well said. What would you like the industry of gastronomy to be like in the near future? If I could ask the question a different way, if you could design it, what would that look like to you?
Very good question. Um, I've been reading many books recently, food related books, but not cookery books. Books about what we need to do to reverse, perhaps we're not able to reverse the course of our attitudes to food production. But gastronomy is directly linked to food production. Of course, it is food production. And I think that I would like to see chefs lead the way of agroecology, whilst empowering local communities along the way. The slow food movement, of which I'm also an ambassador, maintains that agriculture, nutrition, and health should be understood in relation to each other and the roles they can all play in the fight against climate change. What we can grow, how we grow it, and how we eat has enormous impact on public health and the health of the planet. So, in an era plagued by malnutrition, I think it's essential to remember the complex relationship between soil, oceans, plants, animals, and humankind. And I think this is the path that we all need to follow, even if it means going back to simplicity. I understand the excitement of creativity, playing with chemical compounds to create beautiful looking foods and ingredients, but I have a feeling that we kind of need to leave the excitement, or not leave it behind, but marry it perhaps with a healthier, more grounded attitude to food growing, food preparation, and consumption.
I think there would be a lot of people who would agree with you there. And my last question is, who would you recommend for an episode of this podcast? If you could choose anyone.
Well, there are lots of people, but I looked within my brain went dead. Mm, there are lots of people out there, but I looked within the Scoolinary family and chefs that I have liked watching and listening to. So I think I would enjoy listening to Robert Ruiz Moreno, who was an itinerant chef for many years and whose introduction to fermentation I really enjoyed. I'd love to hear how his travels informed his attitude to food and cooking and led him to study and develop fermentation and all he knows about it.
Well, very good. Thank you so much, Irini, for joining us for coffee today.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed the opportunity.
If you liked this episode, don't miss an episode by becoming a member. We're waiting for you each week with more guests. We're on all podcast platforms. Just search for Coffee with Scoolinary. We're also waiting for you at our website and on our social networks, where you can get to know all our courses and teachers.